Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we will go over the supply and demand model, which is basically where variants start. But I will discuss today large number of topics which are I will only give indication. There is a lot of depth. So today we will be looking more at the big picture, the 5,000 miles long journey, and the small steps we will take later. So your assignment for next time is that you should read the first 3 sections of a paper by Sayyid Qamar Abbas and myself. The title is called Efficiency Wage Model. It's linked, and I will send the paper by email to you. And next time at 8:30 a.m. I will take a short quiz, 5-minute, on that paper to start, and then we will go on from there. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا. So, the supply and demand model is central to economics in the sense that everybody believes in it, everybody teaches it, everybody studies it. If you know supply and demand, you are an economist. If you don't, then you are not. But this model is wrong. So now our goal is to explain why this model is wrong, and also to provide you with different, better models. So in the end, hopefully, if you are able to explain why supply and demand theory is wrong, then you will know more than 99% of economic students everywhere in the world, including Harvard and best universities. And you will be able to also do better in the sense that you will be able to provide alternative models which do a better job of explaining the world. So some students were asking about whether there is a textbook. So there is no textbook, but there is lots of written materials, and if you work hard, you will be writing the textbooks for the new generation. This 20th century economics is complete failure, and there is a reason, and we have to start from zero, because, well, not quite zero, I'll explain that. So, what is this supply and demand theory? There is a purpose of this theory. The purpose is to explain how prices are formed in the markets. So, why are water and tomatoes cheap, and why is diamond expensive? This is a question that has been asked by many economists. Water is very useful, tomatoes are very delicious, diamonds have no particular value, why should they be expensive? So, supply and demand theory provides one answer. It has to do with the scarcity of diamonds. Before this, there was a labor theory of value. Both of these are actually wrong theories of price determination. So, the theory of price determination is still an open question, and actually we have a lot of knowledge about how the correct theory should be built, and so people who explore and find out what the correct theory is will have a lot of leverage in terms of ability to do new fundamental research. So first, mostly we will be looking at supply and demand in the labor market, because that's the key, the raison d'être means the reason of existence. So Keynesian economics came into being because Keynes observed the supply and demand does not work in the labor market. You can have unemployment for a long time. That means excess supply of labor for a long, long time. And that means the supply and demand doesn't work. So, partly we will be reading through Keynes to understand what he said also. So, there is a sequence of lectures that I have. Actually, you see, if you want to be the originators of a new generation of economics, which the field is wide open, then you will have to work very hard. So I am going to give you some specific assignments, which is just to read the first 3 sections of the Cover Abbas and Zaman paper in PDR 2005. But in nearly every slide there is a huge amount of additional readings that I will not assign and that you should do on your own as and when you find the time. So there is a sequence of lectures that I have on rereading Keynes. There are about 9 of them. Each of them is 1 page lecture, about 1,000 words. This is what I try to keep it to. And so it basically sets out the reason why we need to reread Keynes, because basically all of the lessons that Keynes taught have been forgotten. So we need to understand what Keynes said again. So one of the lectures is on chapter 2. This is called, the Keynes' book was called General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. Now, there is a reason for this name. There is a reason that Keynes chose this name. He is talking about the general theory of employment. Interest and money will come later. The chapter 2 deals with employment. Now he says that classical economics does not have a theory of employment. So that's a bit strange. So he says that because under the assumptions of classical economics, you always have full employment. So there is never unemployment. And so there is no room for fluctuations in the level of employment. Everybody who wants to work at the going wage will find a job. So there cannot be any fluctuations. And this is the standard supply and demand theory. But genuine unemployment was observed during and after the Great Depression, meaning that there was excess supply of labor and it was not removed by the market mechanism. So it means that supply and demand doesn't work. So now the question is why? And that is basically all of Keynesian theory, all of the general theory, all of that book is about explaining why supply and demand does not work in the labor market. Unfortunately, what Keynes actually said was lost and forgotten. And there was a reinterpretation that was given by Samuelson and Hicks, and that became known as Keynesian theory, even though it actually has very little to do with original Keynesian theory. So all that you have studied as this is Keynesian theory, ISLM, this is not what Keynes said. So nobody knows what Keynes actually said. So here's a picture of the UK unemployment rate between 1865 and 1939. So it's obvious that, you see, if the classical theory was right, then one would not see this graph, because one would see basically a smoothly increasing graph of employment. This is unemployment rate, so employment would be the reverse of this, the remaining part. So as the labor supply increases smoothly, so the employment would increase smoothly, and the unemployment would also remain more or less constant in percentage terms and increase in absolute terms. But you have these obvious fluctuations. So this means that the classical theory cannot explain why these things are happening? Why does this is what you call business cycles. Sometimes you have high employment and sometimes you have low. So that's what business cycles is, and this is what we used to study. Macroeconomics was actually the theory of business cycles before recent times. So the question is, why do we have business cycles? When I was going to Stanford, we had a course in business cycle theory, and all they did was they created difference equations which have fluctuations. And if you have studied differential equations, then you know that you can generate cycles. You have some of the differential equations have sine wave solutions. And so if I set up a differential equation model of the economy which has a solution in terms of a sine wave, then I can say, look, this equation describes the economy. But see, this is a basic problem that I will hint upon here and give you some references. That, as I told you earlier, the concept of modeling, what is a model and what is reality, this is not well understood in the West. So just producing a differential equation which has cycles and saying we have explained business cycles is just nonsense. You have to link the model with reality in somehow. And this is something that if you will reflect on your economics education, you will see that it has never been done. You have studied theory and theory and theory, but it has never been linked to reality. And there is a reason for that, we will see. So anyway, Keynes was not in that. When Keynes was studying economics, economics was not what you know of today. It was not the axiomatic deductive method that you are studying economics with. So Keynes was able to look at reality and see that there is something to explain here, and he said that classical economic theory does not give me any tools which I can use to explain this picture that I see. Basically, why does employment fluctuate? That is the business cycle. According to classical theory, it cannot. So, after examining all possible explanations which could be given within classical theory, that's actually what chapter 2 does. He says that these are the 4 factors which classical theory allows as possible explanations, and he rejects all 4 of them. We will look at that. So it means that classical theory has no explanation. So then he says, okay, there are 2 axioms which we use in classical theory to get to this outcome. So now if I relate it to Varian, we can say that there are 3 principles that are involved. One is that the firms minimize costs. The other is that the laborers maximize utility, which means that they minimize disutility of labor. And the third is that there is equilibrium. So what Keynes says is that after examining these, he says that the idea that laborers make their decision by setting the real wage equal to the marginal disutility of labor, this assumption is wrong. And so he rejects that. And he gives a very simple, very beautiful reason for this. He says that, look, and this is something he actually observed in the British labour market. He said that when some company says that, okay, we are going to cut wages across the board because we cannot manage our costs. So there was I think in the coal mining industry, they decided to cut wages for some reason. So there was a huge strike of the coal miners, and they said, no, we will not accept a cut in the nominal wage. But he says that laborers do not like a cut in nominal wages. But if the general price level rises, there is no strike. So if there is inflation, then when there is inflation, then the real wage decreases. So if the laborers are making their decisions according to the real wage, then they should equally strike a 10% cut in the nominal wage is the same as a 10% increase in the price level when it comes to real wage. So he says, no, they don't. So this is an observation, and so from this observation he concluded that the wage bargain which is done between laborers and their firms, employers, is done in terms of the nominal wages. So the laborers, whatever equilibrium you have, it is based on nominal wages. Now this is actually in conflict with classical theory. Now if in fact this is true, then almost immediately money plays a role in the economy. And in fact, this was one of the misinterpretations of Keynes, that laborers suffer from money illusion, that they think in terms of money. This is not actually what Keynes said, but this is how he was misinterpreted. So, in any case, whenever there is quote-unquote money illusion, or if the laborers respond to money, then money will play a role in the economy. Because exactly because of this, suppose you double the amount of money and quantity theory holds, then the prices level will double, but the laborers will not react, and so that means that the real wage will go down, but the employment will remain the same. That will have massive real effects. Of course, Keynes did not say that this would happen. That actually he said that for small amounts of inflation, the laborers would not pay attention to it. But anyway, the thing is that as soon as we accept the idea that the laborers are responding to nominal wage, then money cannot be neutral, which is one of your basic assumptions in your economic theory. So, one of the key things to understand here is that all of this theory that we are talking about is based on observations of the real world, what Keynes actually saw, which happened historically in England. This is significant, as I will explain. So anyway, once Keynes realized that the classical theory cannot be saved, so then because it cannot explain the real world, so he said, well, a new theory has to be built, and he struggled and he created a new theory, which may be right, which may be wrong, but anyway, it does something which classical theory could not do, and that is to explain why there is a business cycle, why employment fluctuates. And again, as I said, I'm going to give you the big picture. The details are contained in the sequence of lectures that I have, 9 lectures on Keynes. So, but the nutshell is that labor negotiations are about nominal wages, not real wages, and that the second part, which is a very deep insight, one that has been lost. Nobody after Keynes, none of the major economists after Keynes understood this, and it is not understood to this day, is that the real wages is an emergent phenomena. Now this is a terminology which comes from complexity theory, which was actually invented in, this name at least was invented in 1970s, I think, Santa Fe Institute of Complexity. So basically, nearly all of modern economics is about, basically, it says that if you look at the labor market, what happens with one laborer, you just magnify it by n, multiply everything by n, and you get the labor market. So the picture at the level of the individual is the same as the picture at the system level. Same is true of firm theory. You have one firm, and the behavior of that one firm is the same as the behavior of every firm, and then you take n firms and you get the behavior of the industry. So if you want to understand the industry supply of goods, it's enough to understand the firm supply behavior. Once you have the firm supply behavior, then you have the multiply by n and you get the industry supply behavior. So now in complexity theory, what is the key thing is that the behavior of the system is determined by the interactions between the different units, which means that you cannot understand, if you understand the behavior of one individual, it doesn't allow you to understand how the system behaves. And what happens to one individual cannot be multiplied by n to get the behavior of the whole system. So he says that the individual units, the firm negotiates with the laborers and they determine the nominal wages, but nobody is in control of the real wages. The real wages are determined by the system as a whole, and this is not subject to decisions of either the firms or the laborers. And so it might be that the firms, and in fact he says this is exactly the case, that suppose that the laborers ask for high nominal wages and the firms agree to pay high nominal wages, he says what will happen to the prices? Well, when the firms are having higher costs, then they will price their goods higher, and so the real wage will remain the same. It may even go down if the firms, depending on. So he says that the object of interest is an emergent phenomena. It's not controlled by the individual subunits, and this is the mistake that the economists made in terms of thinking that the negotiation between the laborer and the firm occurs in real wages. So automatically the real wage is set by the firm and the wage, and he gives several reasons why this cannot be the case. For one thing, he says that the price index that the firm sees is different from the price index that the laborer sees. The firm, when it thinks about real output and real costs, then it is looking at the costs of the inputs into the production process as its costs. And for the laborer, the real price is the consumer price index, which is his real wage is how much he can buy in terms of consumer goods. The firm has a different basket of goods, so they too don't even have the same real wage. There is no one price index. There is a producer price index and a consumer price index, and these two are different. So the negotiation cannot be in real wages. The real wage means different thing to the consumer and means different thing to the firm. So the individual units only determine the nominal wage, and the real wage gets determined by the system, and the system as a whole may not set the real wage in the direction that the individual units want. So this is the complexity of the system. This problem was completely missed by modern economists. So when I was actually in 1974, I was taking a class in Stanford, my first graduate macroeconomics class, and Duncan Foley was my teacher, and he was very confused at that time. He was a classical economist, and then he neoclassical, and he had written some very good papers in neoclassical theory, and then about that time he was undergoing disillusionment with the neoclassical theory, and he was working toward, now he is a leading heterodox economist, unorthodox. He's still alive. So he was very confused. So he said that, well, I no longer trust neoclassical macro theory, so he didn't take any of the standard texts which were there. And he said, okay, let's go back and read Keynes. So I didn't understand one word of Keynes, so it was very difficult. But fortunately, there were many people who had written about what Keynes had said, so I read one of those books, the Cliff Notes type things. And so I understood, and I was able to answer the questions on the comprehensive. Otherwise, for the general theory, I wouldn't have understood anything and would have failed. So anyway, what I'm saying is that Duncan Foley told us, and this is actually the truth, that Keynes, he gave a picture that there was a brick wall which had been constructed with great effort by the classical economist, and Keynes drove a truck through it. It was completely demolished. And so everybody stood around admiring, oh, what a fantastic job Keynes has done. And then people started to say, okay, well, maybe we can make it a little bit better by adding one brick over here, and then somebody put another brick over there, somebody patched this up, and very soon they had the entire classical theory right back to where they started from before Keynes. And this is exactly what has happened. So this is the classical theory of supply and demand, which is a picture taken from the my paper. So the upward sloping curve is the supply of labor. The higher the real wage, the higher the labor supply. And similarly, the downward sloping curve is the demand for labor by firms, and the intersection is the equilibrium. If the real wage is set above the equilibrium level, then there can be excess employment. That is, lot of people will want to work, but the jobs will be few. So that's the situation. That's the only situation where you have excess supply of labor, is when the real wage is higher than equilibrium level. In particular, this model has the following very important implication, that there is no involuntary unemployment. In equilibrium, anybody who wants to find work at the going market wage level, you can find work. And so the only person who will be unemployed is someone who doesn't want to work at the going wage rate. He wants to work at a wage which is higher than the equilibrium wage level. So is this consistent with what we observe in the real world? Can somebody give me an example which shows that this is not actually what the real world looks like? ग्रेट डिप्रेशन में आज अपनी दुनिया में पाकिस्तान से बात करो.
सर हमारे ग्रेजुएट्स वगैरह को लेकिन कुछ जॉब्स वगैरह नहीं होती.
And are they? It's because they want higher wages than are offered.
No, sir. Even they are willing to work on lower wages and they don't have.
Yes. So then the supply and demand. So what should happen according to the economic theory that you have been taught?
There will
What?
no unemployment according to
No. Suppose that somebody is willing to work for less wage than the going wage rate. Then what will happen? Yes. You see, at Islamic University.
Candidates with much job opportunity.
How is that?
For one opportunity, there will be a lot of candidates.
Yes. There will be large numbers of candidates. Now, what would happen according to theory is that they will say that, okay, you are offering 14,000 rupees for this naib qasid position. I will work for 10,000. But does this happen? No, it doesn't happen. So, the model that you have been studying is not true. That's very important to understand. Now, how can we work with a model that obviously conflicts with reality? This is the question. Now you see, I'm trying to teach you how to think at a meta level. This is very important. That on the one hand there is the theory and the observation, then there is the theory behind the theory. What is the theory? How did this economic theory survive when it is in conflict with facts? How is it that economics textbooks are full of utility maximization models when every single study of consumer behavior shows that consumers do not maximize utilities? How can these things be? Now we have to think at a higher level. What are theories and how do they relate to reality? This is exactly what methodology is. How does one construct a model? What is a model supposed to do? How do the models relate to reality? These are methodological questions. So now one important thing to understand, and this is deep, and again I have a sequence of posts which deals with brief explanations of this, that this methodology of economics is not the same today as it was in early 19th century. There was a dramatic change in methodology in the 1930s. So, the previous methodology, which was used by Marshall, which was used by Keynes, which was used by all of the old economists, Ricardo, Marx, is that they looked at the reality and then they constructed a model which would match some features of the reality that they saw, and if the model produced results which did not match, then they would modify the model. So, you reject theories if the empirical evidence contradicts the theory. And if we were following this methodology, then the theory of supply and demand would be finished, because we would not be able to use it, because we can see with our own eyes that this theory is wrong. But in the 1930s, there was a misunderstanding of science which is called logical positivism. That became a very strong and dominant philosophy. And again, I have several lectures on logical positivism which explain what this philosophy is and why this is wrong. So, basically, logical positivism, the goal of logical positivism was to show that religion is superstition and science is the only possible truth. Science leads to truth, and it is the only way to arrive at truth. And science means that what you observe, what you see is primary, and what is unseen doesn't exist. So that automatically, so once you accept logical positivism, then you automatically assume that there can be no God, there can be no angels, and all of these things are just myths. And the only thing that is true is what you can see and touch. So this was actually a misunderstanding of science. It is not actually how science works. But positivists thought that this is how science works. So one of the consequence of this was that the cardinal utility model was changed to the ordinal utility, because cardinal utility is a measure of how happy you feel, and so this is something that is inside your heart, and so it cannot be observed. So since it cannot be observed, so according to positivism, it doesn't exist. Not according to science. According to positivist understanding of science, it is not scientific to use cardinal utilities. So now the early conception of science, of economics, was not based on the scarcity definition. It has been called, by people who have studied this, Cooter and Rappaport, the paper which has referenced, that there was the material welfare school of economics. In the material welfare school, they said that the study of economics is about how we can use economic goods to provide for the welfare of human beings. Now, when you talk about welfare of human beings, you're talking about something which is subjective, which is not quantifiable, which is not measurable, which is not scientific according to positivists. But actually, so when you have measurable utility, then one of the consequences of this is that you can advocate, and people did, that you should have transfer of wealth from the rich to the poor. Because if you have diminishing marginal utility, then somebody who has $1 billion, he is the last dollar doesn't bring him much, but if somebody is hungry and you give him $1, it brings him a lot of utility. So if you transfer utility from the rich to the poor, transfer money from the rich to the poor, you will increase the welfare of society. Now, this was not pleasing to the rich and the powerful. And so, we are talking again, meta theory. They wanted to develop a theory which, so there were many forces which drive social change and theories. So, in the move to ordinal utility, the only thing which matters is choice. That if I prefer X to Y, then I will choose X over Y. So that's observable. And since that's observable, it's scientific. And basically that was the contribution of Samuelson. He was developed the revealed preference theory, which basically, in the Nobel Prize citation, it is said that he made economics a science by taking out this cardinal utilities and replacing them by ordinal utilities. Now, when you have the scarcity definition, then you have, then you see now there is no, first of all, there is no interpersonal comparison of utility because there is no common scale. And so, from the scarcity point of view, then the giving an extra Rolls Royce to a billionaire may bring more welfare than giving some bread to some hungry person, because now it's no longer, the utility is no longer a measurable concept. And so, so you see, when you change the idea that we are trying to bring about welfare, then you have to redefine what is economics about. So it says, okay, economics is about, and this is the modern definition, fulfilling all desires, whether they are, we don't question desires. This is one of the big points of difference between the old conception of economics and the modern one that you have been taught. In the old conception, we could differentiate between needs and wants. And if somebody wants something, it doesn't necessarily bring great welfare. So in the old conception, somebody's desire to listen to music is different from somebody's desire for bread. And one will increase the welfare, the other will not. So, in the new conception, the two are the same. So, the new modern economic theory made economics an impossible to solve problem. Before the modern conception, if we say that the problem of economics is to solve the needs of mankind, then there is more than enough material in the world to provide for the needs of everybody. And so that would be our goal. But if you change it to say, no, we want to provide for the needs and wants, whatever everybody wants, our job is to provide. Actually, that's haram. According to Islamic conceptions, we provide for the needs and everybody is entitled to it and everybody should be provided for the needs. But idle desires pursuing Hawa, which is the technical term, is actually going to take you to Jahannam. And another verse have you seen those people who take their nafs for God. So basically modern economic theory takes the nafs, the idle desires, for gods, and says that you cannot question the idle desires. So once that becomes the idea that we have to fulfill all desires, then this becomes impossible, because as Gandhi said, that there is enough for everybody's need but not enough for everybody's greed. So in the old economic theory, material welfare, it was possible to solve the economic problem, but in the new economic theory it is not, because wants increase as they are fulfilled. As the hadith says, that if you give the man one value of gold, then he will say that give me another one. So he doesn't, so his belly is not filled except by the dust of the grave. So now the Cooter and Rappaport article is very interesting and important. Basically these authors study the change that took place when economic theory went from cardinal utility to ordinal utility, when the material welfare school was replaced by the scarcity school of thought of Lionel Robbins. And they say that this change did not represent scientific progress. So it was advertised as being progress, but actually it was a backwards move. And this is actually what our main theme is, that since the 1930s, economics has been going backwards. There has been loss of understanding, and because wrong ideas have come to dominate, wrong objectives, wrong methodologies, and many other errors have been made. So basically, instead of increasing in knowledge, the modern economic theory represents ignorance and increasing ignorance. And so it is possible to make revolutionary and radical improvements and changes, and you are the people who are going to do it. So as I said, the goal was changed, and also the methodology was changed. Instead of looking at the real world to find out what our model should be, they shifted to an axiomatic methodology, and this is a quote from Lionel Robbins. The postulates of economic theory, like all scientific theory, which is a mistake on part of Robbins, this is not true of scientific theory. Scientific theory does not work from deductions from series of postulates. So basically, this is the modern economic theory, the root of it. You put down some postulates like firms maximize profits, individuals maximize utilities, and there is equilibrium. If you look at the first chapter of Varian, he says that these are the two, he compresses these into two principles. One is the maximization principle, which he takes for human beings, for consumers. The same maximization principle is applied to firms, and then there is equilibrium. So, you see, once you have these axioms, then everything is deduced from these axioms. Now, in this methodology, there is no room for conflict with reality. This is very important to understand. You see, all of you have studied geometry, so we can prove the Pythagorean theorem that if you have a right-angled triangle, then the sum of the squares of the two sides is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So this proof is made by using axioms and logic, which is exactly what Robbins is describing here. Now, if I draw for you a triangle and say, look, I have a triangle here, and this triangle does not satisfy the Pythagorean theorem. So come and measure it. So in the axiomatics, you don't need to measure this. You don't need to look at this triangle because you have proven something logically. It must be wrong. So when you have an axiomatic methodology, then if somebody says that, look, there is unemployment, you don't need to look at it because you have proven it logically. You started with things which are indisputable facts, something which nobody can argue with. And what can nobody argue with? That people maximize utility, that firms maximize profits, that the prices are determined by equilibrium. So once nobody can argue with these, then a consequence is that there will be no unemployment. So if somebody says, look, outside there is a unemployment, he says, no, there can't be. You are wrong. I don't need to come and look. Now we go back into some ancient history to understand the development of science. You see, Greek science was based on this Euclidean axiomatics, geometry which you have studied, and it has exactly this feature that you start with known axioms and then you prove theorems. So when the Greeks started to do natural science, study the behavior of rocks and plants and earth and planets, so they applied the same method and it failed miserably. For centuries, people had axiomatic systems about how vision works. And so there were books and debates which went on for centuries about whether when we see, is it because of light which comes out from our eyes and strikes the object, or the other way around. From axiomatics, you think about what might be true and then you use logic to derive a conclusion. You never check with anything reality. Like when Aristotle argued that if you take a heavy stone and a light stone and you drop them, the heavy stone will fall faster and the light stone will fall slower. He did not go to the top of a mountain and a cliff and drop two stones to see if it would work. Because, see, there is, according to the Greek theories, there is contingent reality, things which are accidental, which happen by chance. And then there is the big truths which happen. So the big truths you cannot check by dropping stones. Just like if I'm after the Pythagorean theorem, I cannot check the theorem by drawing a triangle and seeing if it is. I have to develop a logical proof. So dropping stones doesn't matter one way or the other. Even if you get the observation which confirms, it will not prove the theorem. And even if you get something which disconfirms, it will not disprove the theorem, because there might be something strange which had happened on this particular time. So the axiom for centuries there's this debate continued because everybody was using axiomatic methodology. Then Ibn al-Haytham came along and he was the inventor of the scientific method. For the first time, he called in reality to check on the theory. And he said that, look, if I look at the sun, my eyes will burn. And that suggests that the light is coming from the sun. And he gave many other examples. He says that, look, if we look at something very far, then it should take long. So if I'm looking here and then I look at the stars, then since the light is going from my eye, it will take a long time to reach the stars. So when I shift to looking at the star, it should take some time before I can see it. But it doesn't happen. It's instantaneous. So that suggests that the light is coming from the star. So he gave many different empirical evidences, and from that he established that the vision is caused by the light coming from the object and hitting the eye. And this was a major advance. This was the first time that empirical observations had been used by in order to create theories. And this is the essence of science. Using reality to form theories instead of what Robbins says, which is your modern. So for very complicated reasons. Now this science, it was developed by the Muslims, and it was transported to the West. It was taken by the West, but they never understood science. To this day, they don't understand what science is. They are, that is to say, they never understood the methodology of science. They understood how to use it. If you get a car, you can learn how to drive it. So they got this machine from the Muslims, and they learned how to use it very well, and they did a lot of improvements to it. But the methodology, how this machine was built, why it was built, this was never understood by them. So the first principle, everybody attributes that the science was Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon said that science is about induction, that you take a pattern in a series of facts, a pattern of observation, and you deduce from this some law. So this is one aspect of science. And actually, after that, there were many other explanations. If you look at, there's Karl Popper, there's Thomas Kuhn, there's Feyerabend, there's hundreds of different theories of what science is. In fact, there's a very nice book called What is This Thing Called Science?, in which there are, he examines many theories and says this is wrong and that is wrong. And there's another book by Ian Hacking, which is similar, and it goes through about 16 or 17 different theories of what science is without coming to any conclusion. So there is no understanding of what science is. But everybody has one piece of the story. So it's like the blind man and the elephant. See, somebody's got the trunk, somebody's got the legs, somebody's got the tail, but nobody has the big picture of what science is. And that is why, and logical positivism was a major mistake about understanding what science is, that caused a lot of damage and continues to cause a lot of damage today. So basically, I'm not going to explain, I have explained science elsewhere, and this is not our goal today. But basically, the key step in going from the axiomatic methodology to science was to switch from the Robbins description to looking at reality first and then trying to develop theory according to the observations. This is one key element of science, and this was how the West got to this misunderstanding of science. Basically, they went backwards. They went back to the axiomatic methodology. There was a complicated story which I'm not going to tell here, but it is described in some of my articles. So now we look at this Keynes. This is a quote from the book of Keynes. Keynes is not a modern economist. He doesn't. He's looking at reality. So he says that if you look at the unemployment in 1932, it is not because the labor refused to accept reduction in many wages. That's the only way that unemployment can arise in classical model. And they were not obstinately demanding real wages which were very high and above the capability of the economic system to produce. And there was a huge amount of fluctuation in the employment. So, and nor is it productivity less. So these facts from experience are a prima facie ground for questioning the adequacy of classical analysis. This is what a scientist does. That you have a theory, you have facts, the facts contradict the theory, you say that, okay, theory is wrong. So if you look at I'm now going in a little bit more detail. This is actually from Keynes' book, the chapter 2. He looks at, okay, there are these 4 possibilities within the classical model about how employment can change. So one of them is that if you have frictional employment, there can be some systematic change where people find jobs more quickly. So if there is a government agency which is looking to match people with jobs, then maybe that will reduce frictional. So that's one way to change employment. The other is that, okay, the laborers suddenly have a change in taste and they like to work harder. So in that case, the marginal utility of labor will go down, and so labor will expand. Or if there's an increase in the marginal product, then the wage equals marginal product. So if the marginal product increases, laborers will hire more labor. Or if there's a decline in the price of consumer goods, that will again increase the real wage. So basically he says that this is the same picture as before. There was all these fluctuations, but these 4 factors did not change. There was no change in the friction, there was no change in in consumer goods prices, there was all of these. So he says that the classical theory cannot explain this reality. So now the Keynesian methodology is he rejected one of the axioms of classical theory. However, current if utility theory is wrong, and we can prove it, and similarly if firm profit maximization theory is wrong, then we should look for some other theory of the firm. If utility theory is wrong, we should look for some other theory of consumer behavior. But what economists do is that if you have if somebody doesn't follow utility, then you just insult the fact instead of changing the theory. You say that, oh, this person is irrational, so I don't need to account for his behavior. Oh, this person doesn't follow utility theory, well, his behavior is irrational. So this is exactly the wrong. This is because of Robbins. We have a Pythagorean theorem, and so if you draw a triangle that doesn't satisfy it, you drew the triangle wrong. And so variance starts out by stating, if you look at the chapter, it says that there's optimization. It's almost tautological. It's self-evidently true, exactly following the line of Robbins, that obviously everybody optimizes. He says that people will choose the consumption bundle that is best for them. Why not? Why shouldn't they? Well, there are many reasons why not. For one thing, advertisements mislead people. There was this study in Australia in which they showed that people buy things and take them home and they never use them, not even once. And they're more than $1 million worth. Why? It's just impulse buying takes place. So where is the optimal consumption? And similarly, this equilibrium. Where is equilibrium? All the time we see shortages in markets, and we see excess supply of labor, we see excess supply, and we see excess demand in many markets, many times. It's our daily experience. So we can reject this. So that means that we need to reject theory. What the economists do is that they modify the facts. So Keynes says that, this is from the book, there are 2 axioms of classical economics. One is that the marginal productivity of labor decreases as you increase hiring, and so you keep hiring until the marginal product of labor equals the wage. So he says, I accept this axiom. But the second axiom, which is that the laborers set their marginal dissolutivity of labor to the real wage, this is wrong. And this is actually obvious, almost obvious, that this is not true. This is a false description of this is not why people labor. The evidence that he gave was just that the asymmetric response to the price increase versus the nominal wage cut. So that's a very strong evidence. But if we think about it, we can add more evidence about this. Most people work because they find a meaningful, they find their job meaningful, and so they don't work because they don't suffer dissolutivity. Actually, a lot of people are workaholics. They like to work, and they work much more than is required of them. So there's no dissolutivity of labor. Well, it depends on the profession. In some cases, this theory is true, but there is a very large variety of different types of motivations for labor, and so this one doesn't cover all of them. So there is strong empirical evidence against the classical theory. This is what Keynes said. There's involuntary unemployment. So what we need to do, he says that, this is a very interesting quote from his book. He says that the classical economists I like in Euclidean geometers in a non-Euclidean world. So if you have in a non-Euclidean world, basically the parallel postulate doesn't hold. So if you have one line and a point different from it, then there can be many different parallel lines to this first one. In Euclidean world, there's only one parallel. So he says that when a Euclidean walks into a non-Euclidean world, instead of modifying their axioms, they are just changing the reality. So this is, and Keynes said that at that time he understood the problem with the axiomatic method. Now, there is more to this than meets the eye. On the ground we have battle between theories, but there's higher level things which are going on which control what is happening. So basically what Keynes, this is an ideological battle which has been, there are some free marketeers who believe that as an ideology that free markets always work best. This is their religion. And there are others who believe in government control of free markets, regulation. So basically the issue is one of whether markets need to be regulated or whether markets should be left unregulated. Now, this, for example, Milton Friedman, who is one of the greatest ideologues of the free markets, he formulates this as the idea of freedom. He says that basically everybody should be free. Hayek, another person, he says that, that's the first principle. We don't care if you have efficiency or not. Everyone should have freedom. Now, one has to understand, very important, that ideologies are designed to support one group but appeal to other groups, so they have to be deceptive. It's very important to understand this, because you see, the free market ideology is extremely beneficial to who? Suppose, let's forget about all economic theory and philosophy. Let's go back to basic intuitions. Suppose that in the world we said that, okay, from now on there are no laws, everybody can do whatever they want, There are no rules. Everybody is completely free. So who would benefit the most from this? The ones who have the most power, exactly. So it seems like, the statement seems like it's equal for all. Everybody is free. But actually it's highly unequal. So there's this famous episode in Iran where one of their prophets, I don't remember who it was, but it's described in history, Mazda, I think, Ahura Mazda maybe. He said that there should be no private property. Everybody is, this world is for all. So this is actually a very good philosophy. But what happened as a result was that the people who had power started taking things from the people who did not. And so it was quite harmful for the poor, even though it seems like it is favorable to the poor, that there is no property I can take, but the poor cannot get access to the property of the rich, but the rich can take the property of the poor. So there is this ideology. So what Keynes said was that free markets will not eliminate unemployment. That's the key message of Keynes. So what's the consequence? Well, the government must intervene to help the unemployed people. So in response to this, basically the Chicago School says that all government interventions are harmful. This is an ideological position. This is something you know in advance, and now you're going to develop theories which prove this. So there is a natural rate of unemployment. This is one of the Chicago School theories, which means that you can't change the unemployment by government policy, which is what Keynes said. And so once there is a natural rate, then you can do intervention, and they will, in order to now, you see, in an ideological battle, you have to use rhetoric, and many people have realized this. Rhetoric means a persuasive argument. So here, what the Chicago School says is that interventions can affect unemployment only temporarily with harmful long-run effects. Obviously, they could not say, which is what they wanted to say, that interventions cannot affect unemployment, because it is an empirical reality. So if you say something that extreme, people will reject it, and this was said and rejected. So they came up with a more sophisticated version of this argument. Yes?
So just resume part, unemployment is just because of this modern schooling and this market mechanism. For example, आज से अगर पहले agrarian उस पे जाए, तो nobody, everyone was working hard for their food and.
Yes, you are very right.
नहीं थी, अभी हम स्कूल में जाते हैं, हम एक फोकस होके जाते हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल मैंने मास्टर्स किया, डिग्री लेके बैठी हूँ, बिकॉज जो आपके इकोनॉमी में कितनी जॉब की डिमांड है, किस स्किल की ज़रूरत है, उस मुताबिक मेरी एजुकेशन नहीं है, या जो डिमांड है उस मुताबिक वो नहीं है. तो मिसमैच बिटवीन एम्प्लॉयर्स एंड जो पोटेंशियल.
You see, what you are saying is actually, it goes deeper. Basically, there was this great transformation which has been discussed by Karl Polanyi. He says that normal society, before the market economy, there were many things outside of the market, and so not everybody had to have a job, and there were some jobs, but there were lots of things which were outside the market economy. Most people would grow their own food, lots of people would exactly. So in the market economy, everything goes through the market. So if you don't have a job, you are in big trouble, and if you don't have money, you are in big trouble. Whereas in a non-market economy, money is not necessary. Even now in small villages in Pakistan, there is no money and nobody cares, because so the market economy creates unemployment, that's true, but Currently we are working within the framework of a market economy, but you are right that market economy is not a natural state of affairs.
It's not fully integrated. For instance, if universities are integrated with the employers or the market, so they can produce the students according to their needs.
There are
That's
many
not
other
technically
ways,
possible.
yes, basically, of organizing. This unregulated markets are very harmful, and it would be possible, like it was in Russia in a command economy, that people were trained for the jobs that already existed for them. So, and even now we can create such an economy. But the ideological, the theory, if you read your books, you will see that they teach you that the free market is the best way of organizing economy. And that is false, but it is written in your books, and it is, people are all over the world are being brainwashed into believing this, including policymakers. So that's the ideological battle that's going on. So here is a picture of what happened as a result of Keynesian theories. The dark blue line is what was owned by bottom 90% of the families. Around the 1940s, you see, in 1930, the Great Depression occurred, and after that, between 20 to 30, you have what is called the Roaring Twenties. This was the time when there was a huge supposed prosperity. Lots of money creation by banks, and so there was stocks were rising and land prices were rising, and actually it seemed like there was prosperity. But when you analyze it, you see that this prosperity was actually deceptive. It was prosperity for the top 0.1%. The light blue line is shooting up, and the bottom 90% is going down between 1920 and 1930. So what seems to be prosperity is actually concealing misery of the majority. Then you had this crash in 1929, and this caused some damage to the top 0.1%. And after the Great Depression, there were lots of measures that were taken to help the bottom of the economy and to regulate the power of the banks. This is very important. The power of the banks was broken. Banks were not allowed to be monopolies, and they were banned from speculating. And these are very important elements. So after that, Keynesian economics was invented, and this was implemented in 1944, where the government's job was to make sure that there is no unemployment. As a result, the bottom 90% prospered, and its income share increased, and the top 0.1% became worse off until about 1980, which is the bottom of the peak for the. So in 1980s, the Reagan-Thatcher revolution took place, and Reagan-Thatcher revolution was all about financial deregulation. This was basically, the banks were chained in 1930s after they caused the global financial crisis. So in 1980s, again, the chains were removed, and so what happened was that the wealthy started becoming wealthier, and the bottom 90 started becoming poorer. And basically from that time on, 1980s, the economic theories also started to change. In the 1970s, when I was studying, the monetarists were a minority school, and they were, the vast majority of people thought that these are crackpots, and they were saying that openly. But since the 1980s, the Chicago school started winning Nobel Prizes. They acquired respectability, and gradually they became the dominant school of economic thought, and currently that is the state of affairs. And you can see the underlying politics behind that when the light blue line has, actually this is in 2010, it has now overtaken. The bottom 90% have less than. In fact, since 2010 to 2016, there has been a dramatically sharp increase in the concentration of wealth at the top. So, most recent figures show that 8 people now have more money than the bottom 3.5 billion. So, this is the effect of free market economics, unregulated markets. Because in unregulated markets, basically, whoever has more money can make more money. So it's a very simple rule. The amount of money you make depends on the amount of money you have. So the poor will remain poor, and the rich will grow richer.
It's just the money, or it's just something beyond money? If I want to work hard and I want to earn more money, then if she is not working and she's just blaming me that you are getting rich, so...
Yes, well, that's a complicated question which is outside the bounds of what I'm discussing. But basically, there are 2 ways to earn. One is productive, that is, you do. There is a book about makers and takers. So there are people who are making things, producing things, and they earn some money. And then there are takers, people who make money just by financial gimmickry. Like interest is one of the clearest examples. That I have money, so I'm entitled to earn money on this without doing any work. So the more parasites you have, the more the economic system creates inequality and also becomes dysfunctional. So basically, as I said in the first part, the classical theory was destroyed by Keynes, but then it was gradually put back together. One of the principal architects of the new theory was the Milton Friedman, and he did a lot of things to basically rebuild the classical theory. One of the key contributions that he made was to provide a monetarist explanation. You see, the Great Depression, this was a problem for free markets, because it was obvious to everybody that the free market cannot eliminate unemployment. That is the key idea of Keynes. So what Milton Friedman did was he said that no, this was not due to the failure of the free market. It was due to the failure of the government in not providing enough money. And so if the government had followed the correct monetary policy, there would have been no Great Depression. That is what Friedman said. Now, this has actually been discredited by an economist called Temin in a number of books. But in fact, even though this has been discredited, Ben Bernanke, when the global financial crisis came along, he followed Friedman's idea and he pumped a huge amount of money into the economy. But so now it has been empirically disproven, because the US Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars of worth of money, but the Great Recession did not go away. So the Great Recession is actually larger in terms of its financial implications than the Great Depression.
Sir, I have one observation about this US economy. We are trying to use their statistics, and I think their economy is not really good.
That is true,
but they're getting a lot of net debtors, and they are net.
Yes, the US economy is not a good model for our economy, but unfortunately, economic theory is constructed as a universal theory, that it works everywhere the same. That is actually another principle of the scientific method which the positivists put into the economic theory. It comes from ignoring reality and working with axioms. So once you start doing that, then your axioms are valid everywhere. The Pythagorean theorem is the same in Pakistan as it is in USA. So basically then so economic theory that currently exists is supposedly a universal invariant, works equally well everywhere. That is one of the flaws of economic theory. So in order to gain respectability, as I said, in the 1970s, the monetarists were completely laughing stock. I mean, our teacher, Bob Solo, used to joke about how these people are just crazy. And actually his jokes like that are still there, that he says about Lucas and Sargent, that you see, if somebody talks, if somebody comes to me and says that I am Napoleon Bonaparte, so I should not start discussing with him, well, what did you do in Battle of Waterloo? And what were the tactics? So when Lucas and Sargent start to discuss their model, it's so ludicrous, it's completely laughable, that I just laugh. I don't discuss it, because it's not, if I start discussing, then I've accepted their ridiculous assumptions. So this was the reaction of the classical of the Keynesian school, which was dominant all over the USA in the 1970s, to the Chicago school theory, which was just Chicago school and maybe a few others. But so in order to gain prestige, there were many different moves, but one of the important ones was the creation of this Swearingen's Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in the memory of Alfred Nobel for 2010. Now this is actually a fake Nobel Prize. This was a bank, and it was funded by money, and this bank is announcing a prize. This is the bank prize, but it says in the memory of Alfred Nobel. So they use this word. Actually, the family of Alfred Nobel made a case against them that you are dishonoring the memory of Alfred Nobel by, this is not a Nobel Prize, but everybody thinks that this is a Nobel Prize, because they made it was in Sweden, and they made the conditions for it similar to the real Nobel Prize, so that people would be deceived, and people are deceived. So one of the first Nobel Prizes were given to, about 50% of the Nobel Prizes are going to Chicago school, and the other 50% to other people, just to keep people deceived that there is some real this has some unbiased aspect. So sometimes they give prizes to people who are against Chicago school. So in 2010, Peter Diamond, Dale Mortensen, Pissarides got the Nobel Prize. And what is their Nobel Prize for? It is based on search theory. Now you see, you can understand models without looking at the details of the model. The search theory is about how employers search for laborers and laborers search for jobs. So this is frictional employment, which is called. So basically the conclusion they come to is that friction causes unemployment, and one of the conclusion of their theory, with lots of mathematical equations, but you can understand immediately, is that if you give unemployment benefits, then you will have longer search times and higher unemployment. It's obvious that if I have some money, I will search harder and longer, and I will look for a better job. And if I'm desperate, then I will immediately take the first job that comes along. It doesn't require. This is what they got the Nobel Prize for. But more importantly, basically the idea is that the government should not intervene, and also that if government intervenes to provide unemployment benefits, this will cause harm by increasing the frictional unemployment. And all unemployment is, of course, frictional. And this is something which already Keynes had rejected. So these people, Lucas, Prescott and Sargent, led the development of what has been called post-real economics. This is basically Paul Romer, well-known, famous economist. He has written an article called The Trouble with Macroeconomics, and he has said that economics is now post-real. What they are saying has so far away from reality that it has to you have to give it a special name, which is that We could call it now alternative facts now in the light of new. So the current modern macroeconomic theory is an alternative fact. It has no relation to the real facts. And so he says that for more than 3 decades, again 1980s, you can understand why 1980 is significant, because basically the top 0.1% reached bottom. And so the politics behind how the new theory emerged is also obvious. And then these new theories drove the economy in the direction that they wanted. So these economic theories are very powerful. They are not just in the books, but they actually affect the world. So he says that the treatment of identification, basically the attack on conventional Keynesian econometrics was made by saying that the identification assumptions made to estimate simultaneous equation models are wrong. So he says that, well, they came up with some ideas, but there has been no progress in the identification problem over the 30 years. So the new macro did not solve the problem for which they attacked Keynesian. And in addition, macroeconomic theorists dismiss facts. So we know it's an experience which every banker can tell you that tight monetary policy causes recessions. We can document this heavily, and he does so. But according to the monetarist, money is neutral. The level of money just parallels the number, so it cannot cause recessions. So they, when you show this evidence, they go back to their axioms, say no, it's not true. So the Chicago school is based on this axiomatic method, and it doesn't accept reality. Then the real business cycle model, which they have, they say that all the factors in the model are real, so money doesn't play any role. So then it comes up with exactly the same problem that Keynes faced. That, okay, you say that if you look at all the real factors, none of them are changing, so you should have this flat unemployment curve. It should not fluctuate like this. So where do these business cycles come from? So what do? They put in random errors into their model. And so people ask that what are these random errors? So they have no answer. That's why he says that they attribute, their models attribute fluctuations to imaginary causal forces that are not influenced by any action taken by anybody. So they just come from, it's what he calls it is phlogiston. It's imaginary substance that was created by physicists to explain some things that, or ether is another thing like that. So modern macroeconomics is based on imaginary forces which drive the economy, because the real forces would lead to the stable. So that's the end of this lecture, and the homework for next time is for you to read the article, which I will try to email to you, but it's also on the website. And so we stop here.